Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Edie, back for yet another round of ACA fun in the summertime. If you've got your computer, your screen up, it shows the agenda. There's three main topics I wanted to cover today. The first, we've had some questions about whether or not you can distribute the Forms 1095 to your employees electronically, so we'll discuss that. Second, as we've been saying, we wanted to have a special session on the filing for COBRA participants, so we're going to cover at least the first half of that today. As always, the first part of my presentation will apply to all banks without regard to how many full-time equivalent employees you have. And I'll let you know when we're finished with that section so that those of you with fewer than 50 full-time equivalent employees can drop off if you'd like. And then I'll look in more detail at the requirements that apply only to those of you who have 50 or more full-time equivalents. So to start first with the electronic distribution requirements. Hold on, folks. We're having a little bit of trouble advancing the slides. Oh my gosh. Which? Oh man. Sorry, we did a test run and it was working fine. I'm not sure what's going on at the moment. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So in order to distribute these forms electronically, the basic rule is they have to be furnished on paper by first-class mail unless you get affirmative consent from your employee to receive the form electronically. If you're going to mail it, it needs to be sent to your the employee's last known permanent address. And particularly in the case of COBRA participants, if you are aware of a situation, for example, where the former spouse has elected COBRA and you know that he or she is no longer living with the employee, you'll need to send that 1095 to that spouse's own address, not to the employee's address. If you want to try to furnish these electronically, you are required to obtain the employee's consent, and the rules are a little silly here, but the bottom line rule is that at some point in the process, the employee has to consent electronically. And that can be either by email or if you're posting them on your intranet, your website, the employee can click his consent to receive it electronically on the website itself. The point there is to make sure that if an employee agrees to receive something electronically, they actually have the means and the capability of accessing that electronic document. So if you're going to email them to employees, then you can get return email consent to receive it in that form or fashion, or you can send an email to employees saying they've been posted on the, either your website or the website of your payroll vendor, and if they consent by return email, then they can go ahead and access that at that website. So those are the rules, very similar to most of the other rules that apply to electronic distribution of employee benefit statements and that sort of thing. If you have any questions about that, please just let us know through the chat box, and we will answer them when we take a break. So the main topic for discussion today is filing for COBRA participants. One thing I want you to be aware of is that the rules we're talking about today are only for employees who have actually terminated from employment, so that the COBRA rights come up by virtue of termination of employment. The rules are different if an employee gets transferred to a part-time position and as a result of that transfer is no longer eligible for health coverage. Under those circumstances, then you would need to offer them COBRA, but the reporting requirements are different. So that probably doesn't happen as frequently as COBRA that comes up as a result of termination of employment, and that's the set of rules that we're going to look at today. So as I said, the first part of this presentation is for banks of all sizes, regardless of the number of full-time equivalents. However, and I'm going to show you the information that needs to be reported, and the demonstration slides that I'm going to show on the 1095B. That's for those banks with fewer than 50 full-time employees. The same, if you have more than 50 full-time equivalent employees, then you're going to be reporting on the C form, but the information that you're going to report is the same, and the boxes that you'll check are identical to the ones that will be shown on the sample slides. It's just that for those with 50 or more full-time equivalent employees, you're going to be filling out Part 4 of the C form, and if you've got fewer than 50, you're going to be filling out Part 3 of the B form. But as I said, the slides I'm about to show apply identically for all sizes of employees. Now, one general rule to keep in mind is that if it's the sort of typical situation where the employee terminates employment and elects COBRA for himself and or either himself alone or for himself and his family members, you're going to record all of this information on the same 1095 form that you would be filing for that employee anyway. So if he's employed in the first part of the year, you would have to file a 1095 showing that coverage. Then if he terminates later in the year and takes COBRA coverage, that's going to be the same form. So you're only going to file one form for that employee. In contrast, if the employee doesn't elect COBRA, but his family members do, then you're going to need to file a separate Form 1095 for those family members. So let's look at these sample slides, and I think it'll be a little more clear. Let's see. Okay, so if you're following along on screen, you'll show there's a 1095B that's been put up here. These are our assumptions. Your employee enrolled in coverage at the beginning of the year. He terminates employment June 15th, and he's offered COBRA as well as all of his covered family members, and the entire family unit elects to have COBRA coverage when the time comes. So the first thing to notice is Part 1, Line 1. You're going to file this report in the name of the employee, just as you would if he had stayed active all year long. So all of that information is going to be the same as it would normally be. And when you get down to Part 4 on the B form or Part 3 on the C form, those lines that you were going to fill out, because remember he had family coverage, they're going to be filled out pretty much identically as to how they would be if he was a full-time employee all year round. So since they've elected coverage, all of the boxes for every month are filled in for employee, spouse, and child. So no difference there from what you would file with respect to somebody who happened to stay active for the entire year. Now let's assume some different facts. This is the case. I'm sorry, before we do that, let's back up. Let's say that the employee elected COBRA coverage for himself, but none of his family members. Then what you would show is you'll show the employee, this is on line 23 for the 1095B or line 17 for the 1095C. Your employee coverage is still going to show coverage for every month of the year. The spouse and the child coverage, now you're just reporting the coverage that that spouse and child had while the employee was active. because after he went to COBRA coverage, he decided not to cover them under his plan. So under those facts, you would see for the spouse and child, you would put X's in the boxes for January through June, because his termination date was June 15, and we cover until the end of the month. So if that were the case, if only the employee elected this coverage, all 12 months would show coverage for the employee, and January through and including June would be checked for the spouse and the child. Okay. Now, since the spouse and the child don't have any additional coverage from July on, there's no additional reporting requirement. So the reverse of this situation is if the employee declines COBRA coverage, but the spouse and the child decide to take it. And so I've put that slide up on your screen. Same basic facts. This is the employee chooses family coverage for January 1st. He terminates employment June 15th. Everybody gets an offer of COBRA, but only the spouse and the child elect it. So you're going to need to file a separate Form 1095 for the spouse and the child. You'll see on line 1 there that the name of the responsible individual is going to be the spouse. You cannot complete these forms in the name of the employee, and you can't send them to the employee's address. They need to go separately to the spouse and the child that's covered through her COBRA coverage. So then if you'll skip down to either line 23 for the Form B or the line 17 on the C, you'll see here that the only coverage you're going to show on this separate 1095 is the months July through December. That's because their coverage has already been reported from January through June on the form that you're going to file under the employee's name, because that's the coverage that was made available to the family unit while the employee was active. So that is pretty much all there is to it for COBRA arising from termination of employment for this part of the form, for the part where you indicate the actual COBRA coverage. Just as an aside, although we're not addressing this specific circumstance today, this slide that's up here now would be the same one you would file if the COBRA qualifying event was divorce and the spouse chose coverage just for herself and or for her child. Again, you would file, if the divorce had occurred on the 15th of June, the COBRA form you would file for that spouse would be the same as the one that's shown on the screen now. So I'm happy to report to those of you who have 50 or fewer full-time employee equivalents that this is the extent of your COBRA reporting responsibilities for those employees who terminate employment. Now, we did want to let you know that Benefit Solver tracks these COBRA enrollees, and if it's a separate family unit, like the slide that's showing on the screen now, that they will show the spouse and the child as a separate unit of coverage. If you have any questions about what you'll see when you go into the Benefit Solver system, let us know, because Lee is on the phone and she'll be happy to answer those questions for you. Okay, so let's move now to the reporting that's required for those with more than 50 full-time employees. As always, these get more complicated. Yeah, I just got a question about when Benefit Solver's full reporting system will be up and operational. We still understand that that's going to be the 1st of September. We haven't heard anything different from them, but I will certainly let you know as soon as we know something. We're pushing them a little bit to get going on that. All right. so we're going to turn our attention now to the 1095C. Again, this is just for those folks with 50 or more full-time employees. Remember everything we just went over about the COBRA coverage that applied to all banks. That's still going to apply. You're still going to enter all that coverage information into the 1095C as we discussed. For this next part of the discussion, I just want to address the codes and the manner of filling out that Part 2, that's the one with all the codes and the dollar amounts and all of that. And it's counterintuitive here, because if you remember on Part 2, the first line 14, the codes that you put in there are supposed to indicate whether or not you've made an offer of coverage to an employee. Once the employee terminates employment and becomes eligible for COBRA, you only enter an offer code if the employee accepts COBRA or if he elects it. So even though you may have offered COBRA during one of these months, if the employee chooses not to accept it, you're going to put in a code 1H. It's not going to show coverage even though you've offered it for all of those months. Now, the code will also change depending on whether it's just the employee who elects COBRA or if the employee's spouse or employee's child or the employee's spouse and child. You have to use a different code for each of those combinations. So you'll see on the screen, I've listed these codes. And we're looking at line 14. If only the employee elects COBRA, you're going to enter code 1B, and I have a sample return that we'll show you in a minute. That's sample report number 3. If the employee and the children elect COBRA, but the spouse does not, you use 1C. For the employee and spouse, but not the children, it's 1D. And 1E is for, as I like to think about it, one everybody, employee, spouse, and children elect COBRA, then you're going to use the 1E for those COBRA coverage months. And again, if the employee declines COBRA altogether, you're going to enter a code 1H. Now, if the employee declines COBRA but the spouse or child elects COBRA, you don't have to worry about the codes in lines 14, 15, or 16, but you do have to report that coverage on the Part 4 of the form that we just talked about. That's the coverage information where you check off the months of coverage. Yes, I'm sorry. I've just had a question whether or not it's okay for banks under 50 employees to drop off now. Yes, please do. This will probably only serve to confuse you and won't provide you with anything of value. Okay, so those are the codes that you're going to use for entering into line 14. So now let's look at a sample return. These are the facts, similar to last time. The employee has family coverage beginning January 1. He terminates employment June 15th. And when he terminates employment, COBRA is offered to everybody in the family. And in this hypothetical scenario, everybody declines COBRA. So none of them are going to have COBRA coverage. I've also put in here that the employee's lowest cost of coverage for the lowest cost option per month is $100. That'll become more significant for the next few scenarios, but that's why I've filled that in. Okay, so you can see, again, January through May, you're going to use 1E. That is the code you would always use for an active employee unless you have the safe harbor of less than, $97.15, in which case you can use 1C. But you can always use 1E under the GBA plan for any active employee, because we also offer spouse and dependent coverage. So what that means is coverage is available to everyone. So January through May, you've got 1E. Starting in June, because the employee in this case, that's a mistake. Oh, my apologies, folks. That's a mistake I caught earlier and forgot to remedy. That's the answer that would be the case if we terminated coverage on the 15th of June. We cover through the end of the month, so if you're looking at the slides on the screen, we will correct them before we post them, but the code for June should also be 1E. Even though the employee declined COBRA coverage, he was covered for the entire month just because that's the way the insurance trust coverage goes. Now, the code at the bottom, line 16, is correct. That's 2B. That means the employee was not a full-time employee for those for that month. So overlooking June, moving to July through December, you'll see that those codes are 1H, and that means, although it means that the employee does not elect COBRA. So there's no cost of coverage, and again, he's not a full-time employee, so the code in line 16 would be 2B. And the lines 17, 18, and 19 are correct. Yes, they're correct because coverage was good through the end of June. So that's the way you complete this if everybody declines COBRA. So the month following the date of termination, you don't show that an offer of coverage was made because nobody chooses it, and the code for that is 1H. Okay. Now, the second scenario is the same basic facts, except that, meaning that he was, had family coverage January 1st. He terminated employment June 15th. And COBRA is offered to everybody in the family, and in this case, all family members elect COBRA. I've put in here that the employee's lowest cost, and that's a little misleading, but what you're going to put in is the employee-only premium for COBRA, even though we know that under the facts of this case that premium is going to be higher because he's covering all of his family members. But you're only going to put in the employee's COBRA premium. Now, you'll see that in some of the instructions as being the lowest COBRA coverage, the lowest employee-only cost for the lowest cost option for an employee. But in fact, when you terminate and you're on COBRA, your only option is to take the COBRA or the coverage that's in place. So at this point, I recommend that you complete the full COBRA cost for employee-only coverage under that COBRA option until we get further guidance, because that's the lowest cost at which that employee can choose COBRA. So in this case, I've shown that it's $500. And as you'll see in Part 3, the months of coverage are, all of them are completed because our hypothetical assumes that everybody's going to be covered throughout the entire year for COBRA. Okay. Now, the last scenario that I've put up on the screen is same basic facts, but in this case, only the employee chooses COBRA coverage, and the spouse and child do not. And you will see that once more I put the wrong entry in June, as I said earlier, because we offer coverage through the month of June. That really should be 1E. The premium would be $100 rather than $500, but the 2C code would be correct. So to correct this slide, and I will do that after we get offline, January through June should have line 14 should be code 1E. Premium should be $100 January through June, and line 16 should be 2C. Starting in July, the code moves to 1B, so that's July through December. The COBRA premium on line 15 would be for July through December $500, and the coverage code would be 2C. Then dropping down to Part 3, this is consistent with what we talked about earlier. This employee is going to be covered every month, so you're going to show all 12 months. But the spouse and the child are covered only through June because their coverage terminated when the employee terminated because they elected not to take COBRA coverage. So those are the rules. The codes for offer of coverage, as I said, in line 14 would change depending on whether or not, say, just the employee and just the child elected coverage versus everybody in the family or nobody in the family, and those codes are listed in the materials as well. I do apologize for the mistake in the month of June that I forgot to correct that before we went online. But that is pretty much it in a nutshell. If anybody has any questions, please let me know by chat. Yes, we have a question. If the bank pays for all premiums for the employee, only in the amount in line 15, or for employee-only coverage, the amount in line 15 would be 0. Is that correct? And that would be true, yes, for as long as that employee is under active employee coverage. So that would be, in our case, through January through June. Starting in July, you would show the actual COBRA cost to that employee. So that remains the same as it would while the employee is on active coverage. Next question is, how did I get the code for 2C on line 16? 2C is the code that trumps all other codes. If an employee is covered during a month on this Part 2, then you always use code 2C. All right. How do we know when someone elects coverage and who it covers? That's going to be available through Benefit Solver, and if you can unmute Lee so she can give us more detail on that.
Yeah, just 1 second, I'm going to unmute Lee. Let's see.
The conference has been unmuted.
Lee, can you touch on that real fast?
Yeah, I just wanted to know how we are notified when someone terminates. When do we know if they've elected COBRA or not? Because don't they have like 60 days to decide?
They do. When you run that report out of...
Oh, and by the way, we were unmuting Lee Bloss so that she could address your question, and after she's done, I will talk to you about the 60-day wait and the election period. So go ahead, Lee.
Once somebody elects COBRA, we change their structure. Right now you see like your bank name, number, and full-time. We change them to the COBRA structure and issue the coverages. Benefit Solvers indicated to us that when you run the report from their system, it will pull the COBRA structures for you, so you will be able to see that as well.
Thank you.
Now, it is going to be one of those situations where you have to go back in and correct what's shown on Benefit Solver. Now, Benefit Solver will correct it retroactively, but that's because and there's a long period of time that could elapse. The employee has 60 days to make their election, and then another 45 days to pay. So I foresee there's going to be some administrative issues there with the timing of entering your information for COBRA folks. Lee, if somebody elects coverage but hasn't paid for it, are they even going to show up on Benefit Solver?
They will not. We don't activate the COBRA coverage
Okay.
until we receive the election form and premium payment.
Okay. All right. So there may be a delay. Y'all will have to keep looking for it, but it won't show. You won't need to report it until it shows up on Benefit Solver. Okay? All right, and we have another question about training concerning the 1094C, and we are going to do that on our next session. We may need to reschedule that session since I expect I'm going to be out of the office, but we will certainly let you know what that date will be. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. Thank you, folks, as always, for calling in, and we will let you know more about Benefit Solver as soon as we know it. Thank you. Oh, no. Before in my life, but never that many
Not
times.
that many at one time.